Hey guys, recently I restored a Motorola 12K2 TV cabinet, and I got to the point where I needed to rub out the finish, but I need to wait a few weeks for the lacquer to fully cure. Well, in the meantime, I can demonstrate how to rub out a lacquer finish with this other TV cabinet from an Admiral 24C16 that I refinished some months ago. I used the same techniques where I stripped it down, and then I used some grain filler and toner lacquer, and then finished it off with a few coats of clear lacquer. And it has the same problems as the Motorola cabinet, where it's rough in some areas where there was some overspray, and in some areas there's a little bit of orange peel, which is something that can happen to lacquer as it dries, where the surface gets rough, and rough like the surface of an orange peel. So I have pulled out some products I can use to take care of that. In areas that are really bad, I'll use some sandpaper. I got 4 and 600 grit, and I will mix up a little bit of warm water and dish detergent so I can do a wet sand. If you just do a dry sand, the lacquer can actually bind up in the grains on the sandpaper and clog it up pretty quickly as you're sanding it. If you do sand, be very careful not to go too deep. It's really easy, especially when you're wet sanding, to cut right through the clear lacquer and down to the either toner lacquer or stain layers below. After that, I will go with steel wool. This is the finest grade I can commonly get, which is 4-0 steel wool. In areas that aren't that bad, like this side, I'm just going right to the steel wool and not doing the sanding at all. In here, I think it's a bit rough here. That's from overspray when I sprayed the top. That was the last surface I did. And some of it just, well, as I'm spraying, some of it comes over the edge and hits the sides and leaves some coarse finish on it. All you do is just rub it going with the grain. And just after a few passes, it gets noticeably smoother. I think you can hear the difference. Smooth here, rough here. If you wanted a really satin finish, you could just stop at this point, but I want to get it a bit shinier than that. So after I'm done with the steel wool on the whole side here, I will move on to these ground stone products. I have coarse pumice stone, which is 2F grade. I've got finer pumice stone, 4F grade, and then finally rotten stone. To use this, use a felt pad or block like this and mineral oil to kind of bind it together. So you pour a little bit of the mineral oil onto the felt block and then sprinkle some of this on. These are like in giant salt pepper shakers. Turn this and you shake a little bit on there, and then you go back and forth on the surface, feeling it occasionally to see how smooth it's getting. When you're done with each grade, clean it off really good with a clean cloth, and you definitely want to use a different felt block for each grade of stone. I like to use this thick felt block for the finest grades so I can get a nice smooth finish on it. For other areas, I have these thinner felt pads. These are good for doing rounded surfaces rather, like when I do this 15DX to get in areas like this where you need to curve it a bit. These work out good. Or maybe smaller angled surfaces on this. You can use these. Something else we need to experiment with is these, which are actually large furniture pads that have a felt surface on them. So I might give that a try. I've laid out some towels here because I need to protect each side while I work on the other. It's too hard to work on it vertically, so I'm going to lie this horizontally on one side while I work on the other. I'll do this side first. Turns out this side was a little bit rougher than I realized at first, so I'm going to do a little bit of wet sanding before the steel wool. So a little bit of soapy water. And I'm going to get the sandpaper itself wet too. I'll pull the water over here. And make sure you keep everything wet. and then you want to clean all this off with a clean rag. You don't want it just to dry on the side. There's actually a lot of lacquer particles now in the soapy water. Yeah, it's getting a lot better now. One way to tell if you've sanded too deep is if you start seeing any red pigment on the sandpaper. That means you've gone through your clear coat down into the colored layers below. Alright, I'm done with the sanding, and now I'm going to the steel wool. I'll go over with this for a while. As time goes by, this will start to get clogged up too. See all that white? That's all the lacquer coming off onto the steel wool. So you want to keep rotating this, and eventually you have to replace it with a new piece of steel wool. And as it breaks down, you're going to get bits of steel wool all over too. So you want to make sure you clean this up really good afterwards, or it's going to potentially scratch it. You also never want to get all these steel wool fibers into the chassis. As you can imagine, they can short a lot of stuff out. I finished with the steel wool and cleaned off all the residue. Now I'm moving on to the 4F grade pumice stone. I've sprinkled a bit on here. Kind of like talcum powder, very fine grit. And I'm going to try using this furniture pad. I've poured a little bit of mineral oil on it already. Looks like I'll need a bit more. I have to think I'll just pour some directly onto the wood. Flip this over. And make sure I get it all over. Basically, you want to kind of combine the oil and the grit into a paste, and you start working that in. Now with this, it's a bit harder to tell how it's working because there's so much grit on there. So the best way I found is to take a rag and actually clean a spot off. Grab one over here. Go. Oh yeah, that's feeling really nice and smooth. You can probably see how much more it's reflecting now. So even with just that small amount of rubbing, it's already had quite an impact. Alright, so here it is after the 4F grade pumice stone, and as you can see, it's quite shiny. If you wanted a nice semi-gloss finish, you could stop right here, but I'm going to go one more grade and use the rotten stone. And I'll use this felt block. I've used it a few times already, so one side is already pretty well saturated. I'm not really sure how long you can keep using a felt block without having to replace it or clean it. I suppose I'll just keep using this till it stops working so well, and maybe just use the other side. So this rotten stone is really, really fine grit. It's a bit gray in color, and it feels like really, really fine talcum powder. Noticeably finer than the pumice stone I was just using. I believe this is the finest grade, or finest grit stuff you can get. And really, you'll see after I'm done with this, there's really no reason why you'd ever want to go any shinier, I think. I don't think you can get any shinier. Also, after this is done, you can wax it. What the wax will do is offer a little bit of protection, but more importantly, it will fill in any very fine scratches, just like when you wax a car. That's what the wax is actually doing. It's filling in any defects in the surface, and then when you buff it, it gives you a nice defect-free surface. It makes it even shinier. Alright, I'm finally done with the rotten stone. And I won't kid you, this is a bit of work. It took me about 2 hours to do this one side, and I'm tired. I'll try to get the top done tonight, but I'll save the other side and the front for tomorrow. You can see how shiny that is. There are a few defects here and there, like right here. Something fell into the lacquer before it's set up, and it's just trapped in there like a flying amber. There's really nothing I can do about it other than strip the cabinet down and refinish it, which I am not going to do for something like that. Casual observer would never notice it. Now, there is still a bit of mineral oil residue on here. I can either go over that a few more times with a clean rag, or if I go ahead and put some lemon oil and wax on this, it'll take care of that too. Here are some products I've used in the past with good success as a final finish over the lacquer. For example, when I did this coffee table, I used a Johnson paste wax, and I do have a video on this. I think it's in 3 parts. I think it's called Refinishing Without Stripping, and I went through the same deal with the pumice and rotten stone and whatnot. Still looking pretty good all these months later. And this is straight up Old English lemon oil. And this is beeswax and orange oil. For now, I'm just going to go over this a bit with this lemon oil, see if I can get some of that mineral oil residue off of it. That Old English did do a nice job of getting off the remaining residue of mineral oil and rotten stone. And now I am taking a break.